Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation. I am TJ Jackson, and I am joined by my eldest brother, Taj Jackson.
What's going on?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are live, of course. We are on Facebook and YouTube simultaneously. You may also be listening to us through our podcast. This is going to be a very informative show, Taj. This is part 3 of our COVID series. We have a specialist, an expert to come on and join us and just teach us more about the virus. With that said, we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people who've experienced loss in our lives. We've been impacted by it, and we've learned from it. So if you need professional help, we urge you to seek it and to find it. Do not just rely on us. Of course, that was our disclaimer, and that is primarily dealing with loss. But I guess it still applies here. And I think that's what our guest is going to talk about, doing your own research, figuring your own things out, and just trying to understand how to utilize information. So with that said, Taj, this is going to be an informative one. So I don't know, unless you want to share something that's going on in your world. I think we
get right to it because this
is an important one.
Yeah.
All right, Taj. I think that's what we need to do. But real quick, I had a question for you, but I can't remember. But oh well. I know. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway, today's guest is the CEO of Oncocyte. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Mr. Ronnie Andrews. Ronnie has close to 30 years of experience in the global clinical and molecular diagnostics industry. In his early years in diagnostics, he worked for Abbott Diagnostics in various roles in infectious disease and virology testing. From 2000 to 2005, he served as the CCO for Roche Molecular Diagnostics, during which time he led the global deployment of HIV viral load and genotype testing into over 40 countries. So obviously, Mr. Andrews knows a lot more than I think both of us combined when it comes to anything virus related. Ronnie's the passionate ambassador for the need for democratization of information into community-based environments to better manage deadly diseases like cancer and infectious diseases, as well as control healthcare costs by keeping the patient and treatment close to home. He speaks regularly to industry groups and was selected as the regional winner for Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year in 2011. This is by the way, the hardest bio I've had to read. Mr. Andrews is like,
some of the words you are pausing on are
am I
words
butchering?
I would not expect you to pause, like entrepreneurial. Like that's not a word that
No, but Taj, this bio is like the real deal. Anyway, today Ronnie is joining us on the Power of Love show to share his expertise and help guide us as we navigate the news surrounding COVID-19. Without much further ado, let's bring in Mr. Ronnie Andrews. Ronnie, how are you, my friend?
Good. How are you guys today? And thanks for having me.
Oh, we're great.
We are great, man, and thanks for joining us. So, Ronnie, first of all, how much of the bio did I butcher? What words did I screw up? Talk to me.
I used to introduce was me, but whoever he is, I'm glad to know him. So no, I'm very blessed. You did a great job, and I can't say half the words either. So I'm a Southern boy from Georgia, and somehow stumbled into this world of infectious disease and oncology because of a passion for, as you said, the community is really where medicine needs to happen, and unfortunately, it tends to happen in academic centers, and especially in the world of COVID and COVID-2, we sort of tend to realize it's New York, it's LA, and those are bad areas. But the reality is it's happening all across America and communities across America. And so part of what I've tried to do is go on shows like this and help really educate people. So, hey, you need to know what you what you need to look for, so you're not dependent on someone else to tell you how to read data and interpret it. And that's kind of what today's show is about, is to empower people so they feel more empowered and less fear and anxiety about the uncertainty around this virus. And that's the goal today. And I appreciate y'all having me.
That's
yeah.
great.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is a novelty virus, and like you said, we don't have nearly the experience or education that you have. So for us, we're just kind of just at everyone's mercy, and oftentimes that could be a very fearful position and lead to stress and anxiety and just, even family issues and on all different types of things. So I thank you for joining us and giving our community some comfort. And as we always do on this Power of Love show for our community, if you all have questions, feel free to ask. This is a very informative show, as you guys know, and Mr. Andrews is here to help us. So I'm going to bring you. You want something to say?
No, I was going to let you go, and I was just going to encourage people to feel free to ask questions. These slides might look a little intense scientifically, but my job is to really break it down and make it easy to understand. So don't want them to get overwhelmed by the slide itself and some of the big words, and I wish I could say half of those words because, but I tell you, the beauty of my world is that I become an ambassador for taking academic knowledge and really democratizing it and letting people, in the community and people like me that are lay people understand it. And so we all have different gifts in our life, and this happens to be one that I have. And so I look forward to sharing whatever I can today. And I think hopefully we'll all leave here with some knowledge that'll help us, again, not have the anxiety. Listen, I want to be upfront with this, everybody on the call, and certainly you two guys. I came into this having spent 17 years in infectious disease and being part of COVID-1 and the molecular analysis of COVID-1. And I thought COVID-2 was just COVID-1 all over again. And I was wrong. I think the thing that you're hearing from the science community today is, oh crap, we kind of didn't know what we didn't know, and we assumed things we shouldn't have in the first 60 days of this virus back in January and February. And to be blunt, had we gone in with a more open mind to it and not assumed it was going to look like COVID-1 did back in 2002, 2003, we as a science community probably would have been better prepared. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just saying that's kind of how we ended up. So looking back, I would tell you this. You claim that I have a lot of knowledge. I catch up with as many data sources as I can, and I just happen to have lived through HIV, HCV, deployment there in the early COVID-1 days. And so that experience has helped me understand the data today, and that's what I hope to impart on the team. So yeah, let's just jump into the slides, but I encourage people to ask questions. It's not for me to sound smart, it's for these guys to get information.
Love it. Okay, before we jump into the first slide, I have to ask you, because this is the first time I actually heard the terms COVID-1 and COVID-2. I know of COVID-19. So if you could just briefly, I'm making the assumption that COVID-1 is related to SARS. Where am I at?
Yeah.
Well, before that, if you don't mind, Ronnie, just getting closer to the mic, because there's a lot of people that are having a hard time hearing you.
Is that good? I can put on my earphones too. Would that be helpful? If I have my earphones on, I have big ears, so it's.
No, yeah, they just can't hear it. Yeah, so or talk louder. I know you're talking loud too. But yeah,
I'm easy to do that. I like to. I have that theater voice, but
yeah,
let's start there. That's a great question. In my world of HIV, we would never have thought about saying that there's 10,000 new AIDS cases. We always said there's 10,000 new HIV infections, of which some small percentage of those become an AIDS case. So what happened in the early days of this is we let the nomenclature get out of control, which actually doesn't tell the whole story. SARS-CoV-1 was coronavirus 1, and there wouldn't have been a 1 if there hadn't been a 2. So it was SARS coronavirus. And that was the 2002, 2003 initial presentation of this type of virus into our community. We saw it early. My team at Roche Molecular worked with the team at the CDC, and we helped understand it because we own the patents to PCR, which is the technology you'll recognize in the industry that we use to test for this. And so the idea here is that there was SARS-CoV-1, and now there's SARS-CoV-2, because now there's another virus that looks very similar to SARS-CoV-1. And we have a slide later that'll show those two and how closely related they are. COVID is the disease that comes from COVID-2. So when you hear, and you're going to see a slide on this later, when you hear a TV, someone on TV saying, hey, we had 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000 new cases today, that's part of what I want to help people tease out. That's not 100,000 cases of COVID. That's 100,000 new COVID-2 infections, of which some percentage of those will become a case, of which some percentage of those will end up in the hospital, and unfortunately, some percentage of those die. And so I really think it's important for the sanity of your audience that we learn to differentiate between what the media says is a whole bunch of cases today from the fact that those are actually positive infections, not necessarily people getting sick with the disease. And that's an important distinction, because you'll see later the disease does disproportionately affect people that are elderly with comorbidities. And as we said earlier, the problem is people that are healthy and don't know they have it because they're not a case, because they haven't been tested yet. They're running around and they're probably giving it to people who unfortunately will have a very bad outcome and don't even.
Okay, so thank you for all that, Mr. Andrews. And I'm gonna start through the slides, if that's okay with you.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it. And we won't spend a lot of time. Just go to the first slide and we'll jump right in there. So this is a fun cartoon for everybody, but the question at the top is, how does the virus infect us? And unfortunately, this virus is a lot like other cold viruses and even like the H1N1 flu virus, which was the old swine flu back in 2009 that is now part of the influenza A vaccine every year. But what this does is it actually injects its RNA into your body, into your cell, and it hijacks the human cell's ability to create proteins out of that. And when it does, it replicates itself. And if you look on that right-hand slide, it basically rapidly uses your own cell to produce bad RNA and bad, ultimately, proteins. And then that releases the next round of of another virus. And so it's very contagious, because it uses your cell as a manufacturing center for its RNA. And you have to keep in mind, viruses really have two missions in life. One is to infect as many people as they can, because that is part of their life cycle. And two, to infuse as much pain as they can when they do that, typically, because that is part of the process of replicating themselves, as destroying the integrity of the human cell. And so the good news about the way this works is there are several opportunities for us to actually intervene with the ability of this virus to actually replicate. And that's what you're going to hear us talk about when we talk about vaccines, or when we talk about some of the drugs for these cases that get really serious, where we stop the viral replication inside your own cell, and it can't create the other virus copies that get out and cause disease.
I may be jumping the gun, and you may talk about this later, but I've heard some quote unquote theories that because a virus, including COVID-19, wants to survive, and it's the goal of a virus is to survive, that if it's too quote unquote deadly, it kills hosts, and therefore would go against what it's trying to do, and therefore can eventually become a weaker virus because it still wants to live. Is there truth to that? And B, do you think that's what could be going on right now with the lower deaths?
Listen, I'm not smart enough to predict this virus and what's going on, but I'll give you my thoughts. You're right on to one point. If that virus killed all the hosts, they'd have nowhere else to replicate and nowhere else to go, right? And so that is one part of the life cycle. The other side of this is, traditionally, as viruses have gotten more and more contagious, they've gotten less and less what we call virulent, they create less and less serious disease. So what we don't know right now is, because I do have a slide on this later, when we shut down the US, which was a smart thing to do, we did postpone sort of that second spike that we saw, but we gave healthcare workers and the healthcare system a chance to figure this out. And two, to be honest, we were able to stretch out and make that virus need to be more contagious. And so as the D strain became the G strain, we see it more contagious, but as it becomes more contagious, it has become less virulent in most cases. And so that's why you're seeing less hospitalizations. And I have slides on all that later, but that's a great point. And it is traditional. This is not a traditional virus, to be blunt, but today it's looking more like it could become one.
Okay, so we'll continue on with the slides.
Yeah, this
go ahead.
COVID-2 and COVID-1, it's big brother, or now I guess little brother, because COVID-2 has done way more damage. You can see from this slide, and you don't have to go into all the detail. If you look at the red is COVID-1 and the blue is COVID-2, you can just look at how we look at the various similar, what we call manifestations of the virus, or in my world of genetics, phenotypes of the virus. You can see that we've got very close similarities between COVID-1 and COVID-2, which, if you go to the next slide, honestly, I think that's why we thought would be so easy to get rid of this thing, and it hasn't for some reason. And so early on, we felt like, well, we better figure out how to test for this thing. And so when you think about testing for COVID-2, this is an important, note for the audience is, in my world of diagnostics, our whole focus is answering questions that a physician needs to move a patient through the cycle to cure, okay? And so what we need to know today are really three basic questions. Does the person have active disease? Does the patient have the disease COVID-19, which is different from the infection? And does the patient have, or has the person been exposed to a COVID-2 infection and therefore built up antibodies or T-cell response, so protects them from getting it and protects other people from getting it from them? And so there's three different types of testing that make this happen. And this is the important point, because I get a lot of friends and family, what test should I take, Ronnie? And I always tell people, if you've been exposed and you're young or you're my age and you're healthy and you're afraid you haven't had symptoms, but you don't want to infect somebody, then you need to go get, unfortunately, the nasal swab, which is almost like getting minor brain surgery if you've had it done. And it's painful, but it's important that they make it hurt, because you need to get enough mucus on the swab so that we can get enough viral copies out to really get a good result. So, but if that test tells you, do you have the virus itself, okay? And ultimately, we want to have a blood test, because finding it in your nostrils or your nasal passages is not nearly as good as knowing if it's in the blood at a titer level that could cause disease. But we assume if it's in the nasal passages, it can cause disease. That's the assumption we're making.
And is that been the issue with some of the test results, where they have the quote unquote accuracy of the test results, because for the virus in the mucus, it may not, or if it's in the bloodstream, then we know it's definitely a positive case versus the mucus?
Yeah, and I think there's two things there. Yes, if you get a bad sample, it's going to come up negative, no matter if you have it or not, and that's not good. The second thing is, and that's why blood is a better sample, because it's an easier sample, it's a more consistent sample, but we're not there yet. That's how we do HIV viral load, and HCV viral load is through blood, and ultimately we hope to get there. But right now, it's just not enough time to get a test like that, so we went with the easiest path from a diagnostic world to get a test to market. And the other thing, though, is, unfortunately, there is this sort of curve where you have 2 or 3 days where you might have active virus, but it hasn't really gotten into your bloodstream. You really don't have symptoms yet, if you're going to get symptoms. And that's why you saw the rapid test, where everybody wanted rapid tests really quickly so we can know in 5 minutes of a guide. The problem is the sensitivity on those tests is about 60 to 70% of the pure nasal swab 3-hour incubation PCR test. And so there is a place for rapid tests, but if you've got, like, football, thank God football's back, right? And I'm an SEC guy, so thank God my guys were stupid enough to keep playing regardless. But the idea is that we want to test those players every day. And the reason you want to test them every day is because you might miss it on day 1 because it's not as sensitive. You might miss it on day 2, but 3 days, in that 3-day window, you're going to catch a positive person. And so the rapid test also is really good if you've got a patient that comes into the ER and they have flu-like symptoms, but you don't know if it's the flu or COVID. And that'll be more important even as we get into November, December, when flu comes back and you're not sure which it is, because running a rapid test, if they have symptoms, they have enough viral copies. You'll always have a positive in symptomatic people in these rapid tests. And that'll help you know it's COVID, isolate them, it's the flu, send them home with fluids, right? And that'll be really important as we get into flu season. But right now, for most of the folks on this call, getting the nasal swab in the full 2-day, waiting that 2 to 3 days is important, because that'll tell you if you really have active virus.
So real quick, is it safe to say if someone has symptoms, the test will be more accurate?
It's safe to say that if they have symptoms, either the rapid test or the nasal swab will be more accurate. The nasal swab is the most accurate without symptoms, and it unfortunately takes more time, but it's the where we actually look for viral copies versus fragments of the virus. And so that's an important distinction. I won't bore you with why, but it's an important distinction between the two. So,
all right, here we go.
So look, antibody detection for folks on the. So once I know I've had it, if I have antibodies, the theory is that now I'm not going to be able to get it again. And so, the reality is we believe this to be true. The science of COVID-19 hasn't proven out that that's true yet. I think there's a debate on both sides of the science world. Typically, when you get IgG antibodies, you have a protection against a future infection. What we don't know, because it's so new, is how long will that protection last for me? And so I think that's the thing that we're all watching with these antibody tests. Antibody tests are typically, based on how they work, are very specific in terms that is a COVID antibody, and it's very sensitive in that we know that that patient has IgM, which is the first antibody that comes up when you get something. If you do IgM and your audience is positive, that means you've got active disease and you're sick right now. You may have not have IgM and IgG comes up later. That's your body's immune memory prepared to fight it again if it comes back. There's another type of memory that you're going to hear a lot about in the coming months and years, and that is T-cell immunity or T-cell memory. We do see, and there's been great studies out of the La Jolla Institute for Infectious Disease, published in a couple of different magazines now, that talk about a high percentage of people that they've looked at, sometimes over 60-70% of people have a cross immunity to a previous coronavirus. Now keep in mind, COVID-1 is the first of what I would call the more acute viruses. Coronaviruses is the common cold virus. That's the family of viruses that cause a common cold. Obviously, COVID-1 and now COVID-2 with COVID have been way more powerful than we've ever seen in terms of the common cold virus. But if you have a common cold and you have a lot of them, you might have a T-cell immunity, which means you have T-cell or immune memory that's going to immediately knock that virus out. And those people are asymptomatic and really don't even build antibodies. And so there's so much knowledge we don't know about your immune system's response to this that's ahead of us, which is why having a vaccine will be very, very important, because until we know that, we want to at least vaccinate high-risk populations as soon as we can.
Now, again, this is just a lame person's mentality, but here's my question to you, Mr. Andrews, Mr. Ronnie Andrews. What kind of safety or what kind of is it possible that COVID-19 is something that we live with for the rest of our lives, that it keeps changing, that we're continuing to chase it, much like we do the flu, where the flu is something that we've had for who knows, how long, for it seems like ever. Is there a good chance now we just brought in another virus that there's a good chance we will continue to get?
I think so. I mean, I think, COVID-1, we hit herd immunity quickly. Probably, we didn't look at it very long because it went away so fast, but probably because of this T-cell memory of coronaviruses and COVID-1, we didn't have to have as many people get infected. But I would tell you this, I think my personal opinion of this is COVID-2 is a virus that will ultimately end up like H1N1. The swine flu we wanted to eradicate, we didn't. And now it's part of the influenza A vaccine every year. So your flu virus shot or flu shot has that vaccine, has that influenza A strains in it. Ultimately, it won't be this year. We'll need separate vaccines for a few years, but ultimately the idea is we will be prepared. If you look closely at the package insert, as we call it in the pharma industry, when you look at the package insert for the flu shot today, you'll see it covers a lot of coronaviruses, or tries to, depending on the year. But obviously, this is different and unique than anything we've seen. So as much as I hate to say it, I'm a realist. We're probably going to be living with this. Now, will we live with it the way we do today? No, it'll get less important to you and I. It'll be more important to physicians who are managing an elderly patient, because if they get it, there's immediate respiratory distress that has to be treated. But I do think it's something that we'll probably live with for a while. Having a vaccine probably not going to create a long-term immunity. We're probably going to have to get revaccinated over and over again.
Okay, so we're going to continue on with the slides.
Yeah, so the other thing we kind of talking about now, and these are the next few slides are really fun. You know, look, this is a very contagious virus. If you look at the H1N1 represented there, you know, if you are infected, you actually infect 1.2 to 1.6 people. COVID, and even now it may be a little higher. This slide I pulled from some data early in the cycle, but it's 2.5, and I've heard up to 3 to 3.5 people per infected person. So if you go to the you know, SARS-CoV-1, if you look at the bottom, was 2 to 4. I think SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 was probably going to end up there. MERS and is really the bad one. Thank God, you know, we were able to not see that in America, but that really killed a lot of people in the Middle East, and it infected a lot of people. You can see that the multiplication rate. If you go to the next slide real quick, we'll go through these. Here's the slide that concerns most of us in the healthcare community, is that you've got, if you notice this, you'll look at the dark line, that's the number of confirmed cases by running a PCR test. The epidemiology models, this is the IHME model, there's the Johns Hopkins model, there's the YKG model, there's a number of models. But this shows you that the mean estimate out there today is there's 3 times as many people running around infected as we actually see with positive tests. And so if you go to one more slide, I think that the thing here is the good news, I think, for most of your audience, given their age group, is if you look at the right, this is a disease that disproportionately affects the elderly. And so someone under 30, if you're 18 to 29, you got a 0.05% chance of, if you get it, of even going to the hospital. This assumes you're healthy and have no comorbidities. If you're 30 to 39, you got a 0.09% chance. If you're old like me and you're in that 50 to 64, even at my age with no comorbidities, I've got a 99.8% chance of not having to go to the hospital if I were to get COVID-2. So for me, what this tells me, if you look at the number of people running around that have it that aren't even tested, if you look at the number of people that don't get symptoms, and you look at this slide and you look at that red line, you realize that everybody out there that doesn't have infection or has infection but no symptoms, and as we're running around, we have family members, we have friends who have comorbidities and may be elderly. And the risk of this virus, unlike the flu, most everybody that gets infected with the flu gets some symptoms, right? And here it's just not the case. And that's the challenge we have. So your audience is probably can feel very confident that this isn't going to impact them in a negative way, but they have parents or grandparents or friends who are elderly and need to be protected. And that's the idea behind mask and separation and all that until we know we have a vaccine. Once we have a vaccine, we can all kind of get back to more normal life.
So those numbers seemed incredibly small and incredibly low. Is the issue, well, I think I know this answer, but I'm going to ask you.
Yeah, go ahead.
The issue is when there's a underlying condition, correct? And I assume the underlying condition, depending on what that condition is, will exacerbate and multiplicate those numbers to different extents.
They go to a much different number in terms of hospitalization rate. If you look at the numbers, and I don't think I have this, I think it's in the later slide, but the average age of death is 80.4 years old, I think, now in America. And 94% of the people that die have at least one comorbidity, and 79.6% of the people had at least two comorbidities. So the death is really related to comorbidities. That doesn't mean you don't get sick. A lot of people are getting sick and have no comorbidities, but what it means is I'm not sick enough to go to the hospital. And that's the difference, right?
Comorbidities.
Underlying conditions. You said it better. I apologize.
No, I like it. I'm here to learn. So comorbidities, can you just give us, I can assume some, but can you just explain some general comorbidities for our community?
There's about 9 or 10 that seem to be the biggest problems, but there's 5 that we look out for. Diabetics, obesity, gross obesity, a history of cardiovascular disease, a history of either lung cancer or other breathing. One that's come up today that might interest your audience that we're still looking at, but when you look at the age group that actually does get hospitalized in the under 30, about 60+% of the people hospitalized are vapors. And what we know now that vaping does concentrate on the cells in your lungs that the virus attacks. And so I won't go into too much science, but if you can imagine, you have a receptor site on your cell, and that receptor site is where the virus comes and attaches. Your healthy cell has one receptor site, maybe 2. Someone that vapes consistently, they have 10 to 12 of those active sites on their healthy lung cells. And so that means the virus has 10 to 12 more times surface area to attach to and create a more rapid, unfortunately, rapid replication of the virus. And we see that, and I have friends that are in emergency world, and they tell me that when a young person comes in, they're always surprised when they're that sick, but most of the time they either are smokers or vapors, which, as you might imagine, it increases the number of what we call ACE2 receptor sites, and that is where the virus attacks.
Wow. Is this all information that has been developing over the last several months, or?
Oh my gosh, we literally weekly now. And it's just a compilation of this emergency room group saw this saw that, and we're starting to get more and more numbers where we can actually put some percentages on it. But, my advice is, listen, I'm a guy because my base business is lung cancer. So I'm telling you, vaping is a dangerous thing. You guys all know that. I'm not judging. I'm just saying factually from a, biology perspective, it doesn't help you. And it certainly doesn't help in the world of COVID-2 going to COVID, because it gives way more receptor sites there. So if you're going to do it, then take some extra precautions, wear your mask, be a little more careful with yourself, because now you're throwing yourself into that underlying condition category.
Love it. Okay, so let's continue on. We got a couple more slides, and then I'll ask a couple questions.
Some good news. The hospital, this is the latest data. This was as of last week. The hospitalization rate across all age groups, as you can see, is going down significantly. That's the good thing. Like I said earlier, I don't know why, other than we're doing a better job of keeping healthy people separated from people that get really sick. But even that elderly age group is going down precipitously. So it looks like, and again, I'm not the epidemiology expert, so take this for what it's worth, from a guy who's studied this through the years, but doesn't live in it every day. It looks to me like this latest strain, which is the G614 strain of the virus, looks like it's weakening in terms of its ability to hurt people, but it's more contagious. And so, to be blunt, that's a good thing. If you go to the next slide, just because I want to get through. I mean, look, the death rate has remained relatively flat. That's the good news. The challenge is, as you know, we're starting to spike again, and we're seeing kids go back to school, and more kids are getting it. So we'll see if there's another round of the elderly infections. And then the next slide, real quick, is really about, there's hope, right? Despite the politicization of this, which I hate as a guy who's kind of an independent, the reality here is we've got a lot of work going on in the vaccine world. And I want to go to the next slide, because then we'll finish up and I'll take a bunch of questions. I know there's a lot of energy around the vaccines, these rapid vaccines, but I wanted to give some science behind why, despite the politicians' battle over it, a messenger RNA vaccine might just work. And here's why. Just like the virus uses the human cell to manufacture more virus, the mRNA vaccine, unlike traditional vaccines, this will be the first time we've actually used a vaccine of this nature because the technology is fairly new. It might just work. And here's why. Because we recreate, we take bioinformatics, we break down the virus's DNA code, we take pieces of that code and recreate it in a synthetic model. We inject that synthetic messenger RNA into your body. It infects your cells just like the virus does, except instead of creating new viruses, it creates what we call, and this gets a little crazy, glycoproteins or viral proteins that look like the virus but cannot hurt the person. And so because of that, that's how these antibodies start to build, and they build rapidly. The good news about the viruses, the vaccines are this. Look, there's Pfizer, Moderna, and then obviously there's a couple more. Those are the two in the hot race to get there. More than likely, we'll see those data at the end of October. More than likely, Pfizer, because they took zero money from the government, so they're on their own path. They don't want to be influenced by the government and the politics. They wanted to either have a vaccine that works or not. We'll see their data. If their data works, they have built at risk 100 million units for the US, 300 million for Europe, because Europe already paid them a little bit to have some made. So they will have a inventory of vaccines, of this new type of vaccine, waiting so that when we get into November, December, and the FDA looks at the data and blesses it, that inventory will then be released for high-risk populations. None of us on this will probably take it this year, but there'll be high-risk populations. So if you have an elderly family member that has these underlying conditions that put them in the high risk and potential for death goes up significantly, the mRNA vaccine will be safe. It's not going to hurt them. The question is it going to build enough glycoprotein titers to really protect them? And I don't know that yet. We won't know till we see the data. But the worst that will happen is they get the vaccine and it gives them a stronger response. Even if they still get sick, it will keep them from going, rapidly into what we now know kills them, which is what we call cytokine storm, which is just an overreaction in our immune system. Once it hasn't worked, then it's like, oh crap, I got to work. That overwhelming your system is what really takes the life of most of these elderly patients.
Wow.
Okay, so before we get to the recap slide, the final slide, I do have a question since you mentioned vaccinations.
Sure.
I'll be honest, I'm a little scared to be the first round of vaccinations, or to run up to a vaccination. Is my fears? I think my fears are relatively common. I'm not going to say majority of people feel that way, right. But are they respectable fears? Is it me just listening to media? Is it me? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, listen, I think the uncertainty that we've never used the mRNA process to build a vaccine because it's a very new process. And keep in mind, I'll give you an example. In 2009, when we first saw H1N1, it took us 3 months to sequence that virus. It's a small virus. And COVID-1 was 30 genes, COVID-2 is about the same. So that's an even smaller virus. And it took us 3 months to vaccinate, which means to sequence it. So if you're trying to create a vaccine using the methodology of sequencing and creating RNA, that's going to take forever to do back in H1N1 2009. Fast forward, I can now sequence the COVID-2 viral genome in a day, right? And instead of $10,000 a sequencing process, I can do it for probably $1,000, if not less. So now pharma companies buy these big sequencing machines and they can replicate that and iterate different versions of that virus, put it into these processes to see if it's going to work. And if it does, they can pick the best of those and bring them to market. So let me answer your question directly. It's right to be concerned because I don't typically take a flu vaccine because I know all the stuff that goes in it besides the attenuated viruses. And so I'm healthy, I have a good immune system, and I typically choose just not to do it. I'm a health nut. I do a lot of supplements, and so I'm into that stuff. So I try not to do those kind of things. But look, here's what I tell you. It's really not this year for you and me anyway. It's for this high-risk population who the risk of dying from COVID is greater than any small side effect they might get from the mRNA vaccine. Next year, we'll have a year of data. By spring, we'll have hundreds of millions, 300 million units. You'll have 4 or 5 more vaccines on the market. You'll have some traditional vaccines out probably late fall next year. So if we can get through this winter and protect the high-risk patients, high-risk population, and all of us can do our best to distance and doing what we're doing, we'll all get there the next year. But don't feel like you're paranoid. We all and I know the science. I think there's a lot of hope there, but I'm still real about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really do, Ronnie. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. What does all of this mean?
Yeah, look, listen. The shelter in place did its job. We now know how to treat these people. We know not to put them on ventilators. That actually caused more damage than it helped. We know now that these patients, when they're really sick, put them on inversion tables, do certain things. We have certain drugs now that minimize the outcome of death, and that's a beautiful thing. We're seeing deaths go down significantly because we know how to treat it better, and we're doing a better job of separating ourselves. Look, we are seeing a decline in the second spike. That's good. We need to still be careful and not get stupid. Look, I think one thing everybody should take home today is not everybody who gets tested for positive is going to get COVID-19. So if you don't have symptoms or you have mild symptoms, don't go to the ER. They need to be there for people that are really sick. That doesn't mean don't go if you're feeling sick. That just means measure that and don't go because you're afraid. More than likely your audience is not going to end up in a severe case. Your immune system, healthy immune systems do really good against this virus. The unhealthy immune systems do horrible, and it's that disparity that really is creating the challenge. And really, be ready. I think there's going to be vaccines. There'll be a lot of arguments at the political level about whether they were rushed to market and all that. I think the one thing I want your audience to understand is my friends in the pharma are good people. They're not mean-spirited people. They're not trying to do this because they want to make a lot of money. The reality is they make a lot more money on oncology drugs than they'll ever make in this area. But the reality is what they're trying to do is help out a cause globally. And I think that there will be a vaccine. It will be usable for high-risk populations. And within a year and a half, we'll all be able to get a vaccine if you want it. Hopefully by then, enough of us will have it that you won't need to get the vaccine, but we're waiting to see that. So that's my take-homes, and I'm happy to take any questions. It's been a real privilege to have this conversation with you guys. And the virus is real, and we need to keep doing what we're doing to stay away from it, and hopefully we'll never see another pandemic like this in your lifetime.
That would be great. Okay, I'm going to run through some questions, and I actually have a question as well. But we're going to start, and I'm going to try to answer. This is the first one from Sophie. Is the vaccine advised for people with high risk? And
that's the population you want to, when it comes out, that first generation vaccine, that's really the people we want to save it for and not rush out for. As a healthy person, I'm not advising you rush out and get the vaccine because we're not going to have enough if you do that for people that really need it.
Great. Tori asks, we've also heard now that wearing a mask during long hours is not good for health. Is that true?
Well, here's what I tell you. Don't eat garlic for lunch and you're probably going to be okay. And the reality is I have friends that are surgeons and they're in surgery 7, 10, 12 hours and they wear masks the whole time. The whole idea of hypoxia is something that, happens, but it's not the gravity of hypoxia in the kind of mask we wear is not going to cause a problem. If you've got a hazmat suit on with that kind of mask, you're breathing a lot of that. That's not necessarily good over long hours, but the types of masks we're all wearing aren't going to hurt you. Like I said, unless you eat garlic for lunch and you got to smell that the whole
and you
day.
got to smell it, yeah.
All right. This was a great question. What would you say about people with special needs like autism? Elhan thought she had heard about people with special needs are more vulnerable to COVID-2.
Autism as a disease itself are not, but they also have a lot of underlying conditions typically. And so you really have to look patient to patient. I wouldn't say that people with autism have a higher chance of being sick from it. But I would say that the underlying conditions that they have are a much higher percentage than the healthy population. So there's probably something to that. But I would just, I'd be careful with those and know what their health status is beyond autism.
Katia wants to know, how long does it take for the virus to actually turn into the disease? And are there preventative measures that can be taken now to avoid developing the disease after having the virus?
That's a great question. That is a really good question, Katia. I hope I'm saying that right. And I love your beautiful smile. It's a great smile. It takes, listen, depending on the person and their immune system, it can take 3 days up to 12, 14 days before you actually start to get symptoms. Typically, though, if you're going to get a serious bout, you're going to get it quick because your immune system's not responding. The virus is replicating rapidly, and that's going to cause you to end up sick. Preventable measures, a lot of those we take and just distancing and the mask. If you feel like you've had it, I always tell people it's like getting the flu. You need to amp up your fluids and mostly your electrolytes. You need to, like I said, take it for what it's worth. I'm a supplement guy. I take things like, you take your vitamins, you get your vitamin C, you get all the things you take there, zinc, and there's people that take a lot of, in my neighborhood in Southern California, take a lot of zinc because they think that helps. So I do think that trying to eat healthy and trying to be healthy is a good thing. I have friends that think because alcohol kills it within 7 to 10 seconds, that if you drink vodka every night, you're going to be okay. I'm not recommending that to your audience, but as tongue in cheek, I hope everybody has
Okay, this is, and you know what? I'm going to go to 2 of these questions because this one is actually one for you to clarify. Janine says, Ronnie, why do you advocate for the COVID vaccine, but you personally don't take the flu shot? Can I try to answer this and you
Sure.
correct me?
Yeah.
I'm thinking kind of like me, you advocate for it because there's people that could be at high risk, and for them, then you should probably take it. But if you're a healthy person and you are in a position where you don't feel there's any comorbidities, maybe saying that wrong, in
Right.
you, then you should be okay and necessarily don't have to take it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And Jeannie, that's a great question. I advocate for these things because they'll help people that need them. I don't feel personally that I need the flu vaccine every year, and so I don't take it. That doesn't mean there aren't people that need the flu vaccine. And I would certainly say if I had underlying conditions and were elderly and had those conditions, I'd take the flu vaccine. My mother, I would recommend that she get it. I just personally don't take it because I don't feel like I need it. And I'd rather, does that make sense? So you hit the nail on the head. But
Yeah.
I think the question is a great question, and I'm not trying to contradict myself. I want to make sure there's vaccine. It's good vaccine, and people that can die from this disease get it. And I'm not one of those people. At least I don't believe I am anyway. Hopefully I don't find out differently.
Ronnie's got a 6-pack under there, so he's good.
Baby.
Okay. And Isabel wants to know, do you advise it for people exposed to a high load, such as teachers, or this, I guess, again, about the vaccination, or do you think the load doesn't matter?
I think the load, we've already proven that to get an infection, you got to have some level of load, okay? Which is why wearing masks, and first, everybody, don't wear a mask, it doesn't matter. Well, we know now that the load matters. And because load matters, it's not you just got a little spray, it's that you're getting a lot of concentration of that spray. So wearing a mask, so here's what I tell you. I don't think if you're a healthy teacher with no underlying conditions and you saw the data, if you're under, 50, I don't think you necessarily need the vaccine. You probably rather your immune system engage it, get rid of it, and get the natural antibodies than to take a vaccine in its first year like this. That would be my advice. If you're a teacher and you have these comorbidities, the underlying conditions, absolutely, you're gonna want to have that vaccine because it's going to protect you from what would become grave disease in your case.
Another question: how can you tell the difference between COVID and the flu?
Yeah, this is one of the dilemma we're getting ready to face in the wintertime, right? And that's where I was going with the rapid COVID test and the rapid flu test. There's a company out now, I just saw the FDA gave it emergency use authorization that they have one test and it will differentiate between the flu virus and COVID. As a treating physician and my friends that are in the ER, the early days of COVID had a very, very specific sort of manifestation. People came in with very high fever, deep chest burning, cough, and that was about it. They didn't have the nausea and the diarrhea and all that. Now, the later versions, they're seeing more of that and less of the burning in the chest. And so I would tell you that it's going to be hard to diagnose the difference this year without a rapid test. And so that's why I think these rapid tests have to get to market, and it looks like they are. So,
okay, Ronnie, 2 more questions, if that's okay with you. One is from Michael Rubenstein, and he wants to know, what can you enlighten in those that got the virus and are having long-term lasting effects like damaged lungs, etc.?
yeah, this is the thing I think that we are most concerned about. The virus has, for some reason, its programming, and I'm not suggesting somebody programmed, I'm just saying in its natural evolution as a virus, it got programmed to viciously attack the types of cells that line your lungs. And when they do, it creates scar tissue. And then you have this swelling, if you will, of the alveoli, and that swelling creates a disease called ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. And the unfortunate thing about that is once you have it, it somewhat becomes chronic. There are ways through things like prednisone or certain types of corticosteroids that they can put in your lungs that will shrink that and help overcome that. There are, therapies like remdesivir and things like that they're starting to use. The problem is once the damage has been done to the lungs, this is a difficult part of things like in my world of lung cancer. Once you've got damage, the lung doesn't do a good job of repairing itself back to normal health, which is why smoking and vaping are so harmful. You don't ever really get back the capacity. So, Michael, listen, I would tell you this. I would get close to a pulmonologist who knows what the hell they're doing about this. Excuse me, I probably can't say that.
No, you're good. You're good, Ronnie.
They need to get to know you, and you need to get to know them. If this stays in a chronic state, you're going to want to have someone that understands how to treat your lungs so that chronic state is something you live with and you're going to have a normal life, and it doesn't continue to create the scarring and the fluid buildup that are going to limit your capacity to do normal things.
Is it safe to assume that because of COVID-19 that there's going to be more attention to trying to fix this problem since there's more people out there struggling with it?
I agree. Listen, one of the things we've seen, and I hate to say this as a benefit, I don't know if there is a benefit to this virus, except that more people went to the emergency room because they were feeling problems with their breathing. And we got, I think our identification of early stage lung went up 12, 15%. If we catch lung cancer early, we can cure it, right? And so the acuity of our knowledge now, holy smoke, we got to pay more attention. That may not just be the flu or a walking pneumonia. That might be something caused by COVID, and we need to pay more attention. Absolutely, I think the ER world is aware of that, and I think we'll see now listen, it takes a while for the hot hit areas like LA, New York, et cetera, for that knowledge, that systemic knowledge in ER to work across the country to smaller communities. But you will see, I think, a greater awareness of that when they see people come in, and hopefully that'll work into a much better outcome for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the final question was actually a couple people were asking it, and now that I scroll through, I can't find it, but I'll try to do my best to paraphrase what it was. It was in relation to the weather. Summer, did the summer, I know there was talks about the summer would dampen the virus. Did that happen? And then the second part would be going into the winter. Are we in more trouble now? So let us know your opinion.
The answer is this. I don't think we saw evidence that the heat did anything to this virus in terms of reducing its contagiousness. Did we see it reduce the ability to cause grave disease? Maybe. I would also say this: the problem in certain parts of the country, when they get hot, people go inside, and they're inside, and now they're in the air conditioning and they're closer together. And so, there's probably people smarter than me that follow the epidemiology that could tell you, yeah, in this area the heat impacted it in a positive way, in this area it didn't. I don't know that I can give you a really good answer on that, other than I don't think the evidence is there that it really slowed it down, which makes me a little nervous about this virus, because the typical coronaviruses do go away. The flu, as you know, goes away in the summer. So what happens this winter? I mean, this winter, we're going to probably see another round. I don't think we got to herd immunity in most places. I mean, there's argument by the epidemiologists and certainly guys out of La Jolla Institute for Infectious Disease that maybe Sweden got to herd immunity, maybe the New York area is close, but the rest of us aren't. So you're going to see a resurgence. And I would tell you, by the transient nature of New York, you're never going to have, you're not going to see herd immunity there. People come in and out of there so fast. So I think the idea here is this winter, we should all prepare for a combination of flu and COVID-2 infections. And like I said earlier, though, if people that are high risk get vaccinated, and those of us that aren't high risk try to manage ourselves well, we can minimize the impact of this disease through the winter until we get really to where a vaccine can be given to everyone.
Quick question, herd immunity. It's a trendy word right now. Can you just quickly explain what that is?
Yeah, remember I mentioned the Tcells and how people that have had all these corona colds now have Tcells. The idea is that if enough people get infected and have Tcell response, then the virus has nowhere else to go. And when it doesn't have nowhere else to go, it dies. That's COVID-1. You can argue we reached herd immunity and it didn't go anywhere else. H1N1, we never reached herd immunity. And so it's in your flu vaccine every year. I don't know. I'm not sure we'll get there. I hope we do.
Yeah.
I think there's a certain population that will have T-cell immunity and they'll be great. But until we have a T-cell test, which we don't really have one today that could be deployed rapidly, you don't really know. So I think you have to assume you're not T-cell, you don't have active T-cells, and you better prepare for it. And then ultimately, we will have a test for T-cell, monitoring T-cells. And when we do have that test, that'll be helpful. But for this year, we need to buckle up and, as I say, buckle up the chin strap, put on the eye paint, get ready and beat this sucker. So
okay, and I lied. There is one more quick question for you. I'm sorry. You said you're a supplement guy. So is there any vitamins or foods or supplements you think you would advise to take to strengthen our immune system for this virus?
Look, I'm a turmeric guy. I believe in that. I take it. It's been great for inflammation. It has been shown to help in the immune world, especially in my world of oncology. I think multivitamin that has zinc and some of those compounds in it, it can't hurt. It's not going to hurt you, right? It's only going to help you. I also think this, in the cancer world, we've learned this, that cancer loves sugar and it loves acidic environments. And what we've learned is if we get a patient's body to a more alkaline state, I'll explain what that is in a second, but if we get it there, they can fight the disease better. And so what I tell you is to help your immune system out, if you eat leaner protein, you do a lot of greens like, bok choy and broccoli and asparagus. Those are all very high antioxidant oriented greens that get your body's interstitial fluids up above the acidic state, and your immune system can be a little stronger in how it functions. All those things don't hurt you. Will they keep you from getting it? No way, but at least they're not going to hurt you, right? And they'll help you. And I'd say it's going to help you be healthy regardless. So, but again, like I said, I'm a 60-plus-year-old health nut that's trying to live to be 120, and take it for what it's worth. So
I love it. I love it.
Did I have a question?
Yes.
Question from Kathy. She basically said, "I've kept my kids at home, but plan on sending them back to school. As far as that goes, should I worry about my kids being around my grandparents?"
Yeah, I think that. Do your grandparents have underlying conditions?
Yeah,
that
would be the question.
Yeah, I think you do. Oh, that's probably the foundation. I'm not bad. Is that your grandparents?
No.
This is from someone in the community was asking, so he's just relaying the question.
Yeah, here's the deal. I think you gotta prepare to send them to school. They need to go to school. They're probably not going to get sick if they don't have underlying conditions. They're going to get rid of it, get their immunity to it. Hopefully, right? They're young, they're strong. But they are carriers. So please be careful, with that. And I think that's an important thing to let people know. And look, I don't want to speak from such a position of authority. A lot of this stuff we're still learning. So I want everyone on this call.
Yeah.
I'm telling you what I know today. And a lot of this is me trying to prepare us for what could come, but I can easily be wrong, as my wife will tell you that happens.
Well, your information and your background is a lot more, accomplished than most of us. So we appreciate you've been incredibly honest and open, and we really appreciate that.
She has Graves' disease.
Yeah. Probably not gonna be a serious problem, but I don't want to be the guy to tell them it's okay.
It's better to be safe than sorry.
The doctor that's managing the Graves' disease should be the person that helps them with that personally. So
perfect.
Good
answer.
Mr. Ronnie Andrews, thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned before, our live, you get 30. I should just say 1 minute. 1 minute, up to 1 minute, to talk about anything you want to talk about. Go ahead and start it now.
Yeah. Hey, listen. I'm a guy who lived through the 60s and saw a lot of really change in our world. And I saw a lot of challenges in the battles that were fought over that. And the only way out of that were people to respect and care and love each other the way we were called to do as human beings. And I see a lot of that in this political environment. And I'm not a real political guy. I just like to encourage all of us to say, you know what? Stop, listen with some empathy, try to understand, and let's try to love each other. The election's going to be over. We got to get back to some level of normalcy. And that's only going to happen if we all respect each other and respect the backgrounds and the histories and all the things that we know to be real and meaningful to people. And let's quit being so judgmental and start loving each other regardless of the flaws we have. And I always say, I was trained by my grandmother, mercy triumphs over judgment. Let's try to offer mercy first before we judge people. That's my minute. There you go.
I couldn't have said it better. And I appreciate those words. And I think we're in a time where we need to continue to repeat that, because that is the answer. Ronnie, on behalf of my brother and the whole community, thank you so much for joining us and spending the time with us. And that's it. Just thank you.
I just appreciate you letting an old man hang out with you young guys. Back later and just whatever topic. You guys are fun. Thanks a lot. I appreciate the time.
Awesome, Ronnie. Thank you so much, man. Have a great day.
You too.
Taj, what did you think? I thought amazing.
So informative,
Right?
I was just trying to soak it all in terms of learn.
Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, I got so educated in a way, and
that's not easy to do, to educate you, Todd.
I'm all over the place trying to get a little knowledge here and there, but it was very informative for me. And I was watching the chat and picking up stuff, and I know that they loved it as well. So,
well, for me, it was incredibly informative. Like you just said, I really appreciated his authenticity and his openness. And, someone like me who always is juggling what the media is reporting and, all that kind of stuff and being responsible. It was just good to hear someone with his background and experience explain things so well and have the data to support what he was saying. So, again, I thought it was an amazing show, and that's it. Anything else you want to say, Taj, before I wrap?
No, everyone stay safe. Be courteous of others, and that's it.
Yes, love each other. Like Ronnie said to close his segment, love each other, show mercy, and that is it, everyone. Until next Wednesday, take care of yourself. God bless you all, and love always. Adios.